I work as a security guard at a quarry about 10 miles outside of the town where I live. I started there about 3 months ago and was immediately stuck on the night shift. New hires had to do their time there until a more longer term employee left. Then I'd be able to do days. It sucked, of course, but in this economy, I had to remind myself I was lucky to have a job. The quarry was in a very isolated location, and at night, I was out there by myself from 11 p.m. until another guy showed up at 7 a.m. I'd never had any trouble and was trained to just look out for thieves, as there was a lot of valuable equipment and metals there that would be attractive to criminals. One night a few months ago, I was driving into work in the teeth of a horrible rainstorm. It had been forecast, but somebody had to go into work at the quarry, and that somebody was me. I arrived at the tin shack by the quarry gate, and after parking, charged indoors through the heavy rain. The other guy, Dan, laughed as I came in, seeing me soaked just from running across the road. He got up to get his coat and said, "Enjoy your walk-arounds." That lucky sod had done all this before the rains came. As Dan left, I resolved that no way was I doing any rounds in this weather. So there I was, sitting in the security shack, listening to the rain belting off the roof. I took out a book I'd been reading and settled in to try and finish it. At some stage, I nodded off. I awoke with a start, having heard some sort of bang, and assumed it was the book hitting the floor, although it sounded way too loud for that, almost like a sonic boom from outside. So I assumed that it was just my mind playing tricks. Then there was a small flash of light at the corner of my vision. Again, I thought this was an artifact of me waking up. However, when I turned round and looked out the window, I could see a reflection where everything should have been pitch black. My heart pumped faster, as I was convinced that there must have been thieves outside, who had picked this horrible weather night to steal, thinking that security might not be on site. Now, I wasn't ever going to tackle a bunch of potentially armed thieves while I was making minimum wage. But if I was able to identify that that was what was taking place, I was to call the police and sound an alarm, which would have made a lot of noise around the quarry, hopefully scaring anyone off. Arriving at the window, I was surprised to see that the light was in fact from lights in the sky, reflecting down upon the shack. Looking up, I couldn't really see what was going on. Lights were flitting around above the building, and I couldn't tell whether they were near or far. I'd become pretty much transfixed until all at once the lights stopped, plunging the area into blackness again. Once again, the only sound was rain hammering on the roof. Seemingly from nowhere, another sound came. It was a low moan, quiet but all-encompassing, feeling like it was right beside me. Right, I said to myself. Someone's messing me around and playing tricks on me. I picked up my torch and put on my jacket and stormed outside, determined to confront whoever it was that was pranking me, regardless of the downpour. Stepping out to the gate and standing on the road into the quarry, I shone my flashlight into the darkness and circled round. When the light fell on the shack, the moaning started again. This time when I heard it, it sounded more sinister, less human. Now I started to get scared. It was accompanied by a strange scuttling noise, like something large struggling through undergrowth. That was enough for me. Being only a few yards from my car, I sprinted through the rain, hand shaking as I tried to unlock it and get in. I hit the gas and steamed forward, driving round the gate and probably damaging the undercarriage of the car. But I dare not get out again. Looking back, I thought I saw a hulking figure in the dim light near the shack. I stepped on it again and my heart didn't stop pounding until I was home. Phoning the supervisor at the security company, I breathlessly told my story. He was furious that I'd abandoned the post, and I got furious back, telling him what he could do with his job. He demanded I call the police, but I answered that that was his problem, since I'd just quit. I never heard another thing about the whole situation. I don't know what the hell was going on out there that night, but I'd rather be unemployed than go through that type of thing ever again. Being a 25-year-old female in the city isn't easy these days. I graduated university and was full of hope, but my university degree wasn't the most useful when it came to finding well-paid work. I'd done a tour of duty as a barista, which was pretty soul-destroying, not least because I couldn't afford my own place and had to share with others, which I hated. Eventually I found an office job which, while not providing me with a spectacular paycheck, was in theory enough to enable me to finally get my own place. In theory, anyway. I looked around and places I liked were either gone or there was just so much competition that I lost out. I started to move further and further out of town, but still couldn't find anything. I came across an ad for a duplex where both units were empty. Surely this was somewhere I could finally get. I drove out one evening after work and was increasingly disappointed as I got closer. The area had been described as up and coming, but it looked really dodgy. Worse still, my GPS led me up a deserted laneway back off the road, with only 2 buildings at the end of it, and then just fields around. The landlord was standing outside, and I don't know if he sensed my discomfort, but he tried to be welcoming and chatty. Going inside, it was surprising to find that the place was really nice, redeveloped inside and pristine, shining new. I was so impressed, and this overcame my reservations about the neighbourhood. I asked some questions about the place to the landlord, and he confirmed that the upstairs unit was empty, but he'd taken someone's deposit and was waiting to sign a lease. So it was the ground floor or nothing. He told me that the duplex across the road was also empty and was slated to be redeveloped. I had to think about things, but I knew then and there that this was the place for me. Not least because I'd had such horrible luck finding somewhere else I could afford. You can't have everything. I took the unit then and there. I was determined to make the best of it, and it was a nice place inside. A few days later, I loaded up my car because I didn't have too many possessions at the place that I was sharing. I ordered a bed and made do with an air mattress for the first few days. It wasn't going to be too much of a hardship, given how well appointed the place was inside. Moving in Friday, I was tired that first night and crashed out. I did hear a few raised voices outside and what sounded like a few altercations, which disturbed me. But that was how this area was after dark. It seemed a lot safer in the daytime when I did some exploring on the Saturday afternoon, but I was forced back to the apartment after about 3 p.m. when a huge rainstorm blew in. That night I was in the kitchen, watching the rain hammer down. Looking across to the deserted duplex, I was sure I saw a dim light on in the ground floor unit. That's strange, I thought. It's supposed to be empty. I thought maybe it was light reflected in the rain, but there definitely seemed to be a small glow inside the unit. I know this was a dumb thing to do, but I decided that since there was no one around because of the rainstorm, I'd put on my raincoat and put up my umbrella and stroll across to take a quick look. The rain was absolutely sheeting down out there. As I got closer, there was no mistake. There was definitely a candle or some small light in the lower unit across the way. I got a little closer and peered ahead. Then, to my horror, a hideous growling face popped up in the window. I screamed and ran back to my unit. Getting inside, I was relieved but almost hyperventilating with fear. Who on earth was across there? I didn't have time enough to discern the features, only that the face was horrifying. Pulling the blinds and dimming the light, I looked out the kitchen window again. Sure enough, I could see the outline of the face still in the window. Then it disappeared. Could that horrible figure be coming across the road? I decided to hunker down in the darkness and wait. A few minutes later I heard scuffling outside my window and saw a shadow pass across. My heart dropped and began beating furiously. What had I done? Retreating away from the window, I made sure my door was locked. Just seconds after I did, I saw the handle move slowly up and down, then rattle a little more urgently. Terrified, I ran to the bedroom, locked the door and phoned 911. I was lucky that night. Within a few minutes, the police were on scene. I heard a commotion, and shortly afterwards, officers were knocking on my door. The figure had been captured, and it turned out he was a wanted man on the run, suspected of murder, who'd broken into the condemned duplex just that night. My heart shook, and I had a few very rough nights after that, waking up in a cold sweat. The police were wonderful to me, and for some time after, they used to swing by in the evening and shine a light around. I've put the whole thing behind me, and a little while after, I got a better job, found a great man, and we moved in together. Sometimes I look back on that night, though, and shiver at the thought of it. I've been a highway cop for a number of years. I like the freedom of driving the roads, even though I have to go to calls just like any other cop. Getting an emergency and putting the lights on to speed down mostly deserted highways is a job I love. One night there was a huge storm over our area while I was on duty. We were expecting a lot of calls related to drivers getting stuck or coming off the road in the terrible driving conditions, and there were a few of those to begin with. Then the worst of the storm seemed to blow out, and the calls largely did too. Other than that, everyone had expected the storm, so there wasn't many out on the roads and not too many of the usual type of calls either. One did come in that was unexpected though. A driver and a tow truck guy, who pulled him out of a ditch, called in that they'd heard a woman screaming in a dark area of the highway, surrounded by woods. I caught the call, and I certainly had some questions. First, I wanted to know if the driver and the tow truck guy were still there. Dispatch told me no. They'd apparently freaked out and hightailed it out of there, getting a GPS of where they'd heard it, and making the call after they'd put some distance between themselves and the location. Were they sure they'd heard screaming, I wanted to know. Apparently so, and it had scared them. I asked if we had any backup and was told no one was available or close enough. I put the lights on and booted it down the road as fast as the horrible weather conditions would allow me. Despite hustling, it still took me about 15 minutes to get there in the smashing rain. I was thinking that if anyone was getting killed out here, it would have happened long before I managed to arrive. I pulled the cruiser onto the hard shoulder and listened for a moment. All I could hear was rain. I called into dispatch and let them know that I was on scene and was getting out to take a look. I opened the door to a mass of rain flooding in. It was horrible, but I was a cop and this was my job, so out I got. I could barely see the forest by the side of the highway. Walking up to the guardrail, I shone my torch into the trees. Like a direct reaction to the light, a blood-curdling scream rang out, chilling my already chilled bones even further. I guess it sounded like a woman's scream, but also vaguely like an animalistic cry. I understood why the driver and the tow truck guy were freaked out. Once again, this was my job, so I girded my loins and stepped off-road into the woods. I called out that I was the police and drew my weapon. The screaming continued as I stepped forward, but seemed to move a little further away or become quieter. I followed. Now I started to wonder about the wisdom of going further. The scream seemed more and more not like a woman, and more not human. I made the decision to switch off my torch, even though I was plunged into total darkness. The screaming stopped. It took all my fortitude to stand there as the rain hammered down in the woods. Then I turned my torch back on, and the screaming started up all over again. Now I knew, whatever was out there, I was pretty sure it wasn't a woman. As if to emphasize my fears, when I turned and began to walk away to the cruiser, a much lower guttural growl came from within the woods. I quickened up my pace and got back to the cruiser. Staying professional, I made the call to dispatch and told them that whatever was out there was some sort of animal and not a woman. That didn't truly tell the story. It wasn't any kind of animal I've ever heard, before or since. Not everyone's cut out for police work. I am, and I certainly don't scare easy, but that night was weird. And for all the dangerous calls I've been on over the years, I never once thought that I was dealing with anything other than a human being. Until that night.